The massive Galactic Council chamber buzzed with nervous energy as representatives from hundreds of worlds gathered for an emergency session. The air itself seemed to vibrate with fear as ancient keeper of records, a being so old that most had forgotten his original species, slowly approached the central podium. His gnarled fingers trembled as he activated the forbidden archive systems that hadn't been touched in over 10,000 years. A brilliant holographic display burst to life above the assembly, showing a three-dimensional map of the galaxy. Stars twinkled like diamonds against the dark void. But what caught everyone's attention were the red markers moving across the outer rim territories. These weren't ordinary ship movements. The patterns were too methodical, too destructive, too familiar to those who remembered the old stories. The Devourers have returned. The Keeper's voice echoed through the chamber like a death sentence. Gasps erupted from the crowd. Several smaller species representatives immediately began broadcasting emergency signals to their home worlds. The Devourers weren't just another hostile alien race. They were the stuff of nightmares, the monsters that parents used to frighten children into obedience across 1,000 different worlds. For 10 millennia, the Devourers had been nothing but legend. Stories told around campfires about planet-sized creatures that could swallow entire solar systems. Bioships that grew stronger by consuming the life force of entire civilizations. A race so advanced and so hungry that they had nearly wiped out all intelligent life in the galaxy before mysteriously vanishing into the deep void. The holographic display zoomed in on the outer rim, showing the trail of destruction the Devourers had already left behind. Dead worlds floated in space like abandoned toys, their surfaces stripped bare of all organic matter. Space stations that had housed millions were now nothing but twisted metal skeletons drifting through the darkness. The bioships responsible for this devastation were massive beyond imagination. Some the size of small moons, all pulsing with an eerie bioluminescent glow. Council members from warrior races that had never known fear began to shake. The mighty Krellians, who had conquered dozens of star systems, were already discussing full military withdrawal. The technological Nexari started calculating how long it would take to evacuate their core worlds. Even the ancient ethereals, beings of pure energy who had transcended physical form, seemed to flicker with anxiety. But in the midst of all this panic, one figure remained perfectly still. Director Mina Kim, the human representative, sat calmly. In her chair, her dark eyes studying the holographic display with the intensity of a predator analyzing its prey. While other ambassadors whispered frantically to their advisors or shouted orders into their communication devices, she simply watched and waited. The Keeper continued his briefing, explaining how the Devourers' bioships had been detected crossing into known space just days ago. Their massive forms had been picked up by deep space monitoring stations before those stations went dark forever. The creatures were moving with purpose, following ancient migration routes that led directly toward the galaxy's most populated sectors. When the briefing ended and the chamber erupted into chaos, with representatives demanding immediate military action or complete evacuation, Mina Kim finally spoke. Her voice cut through the noise like a blade through silk, calm and measured. "Give me the exact coordinates of their fleet," she said simply. The request was so unexpected, so different from the panic around her that the entire chamber fell silent. Everyone turned to stare at the human representative, wondering if she had lost her mind or if humanity had some secret weapon they didn't know about. The first Devourer scout ships emerged from hyperspace at the edge of human territory like nightmares given form. These weren't machines in any traditional sense, were living creatures. Bioships that pulsed with their own heartbeats and breathed through massive organic vents along their hulls. Each one was the size of a city, their surfaces covered in what looked like scales but were actually sophisticated sensor arrays that could detect life from light years away. The scout fleet had done this dance thousands of times before across the galaxy. They would arrive at the borders of a civilization, and immediately the space around them would fill with desperate transmissions. Pleas for mercy, offers of tribute, or frantic calls for military assistance. The local defense forces would scramble, to form battle lines, usually positioning themselves around their most important colonies or homeworld. But as the Devourer scouts spread out across human space, something felt wrong. The void was silent. No panicked radio chatter, no emergency broadcasts, no fleets rushing to defensive positions. The space lanes that should have been crowded with evacuating civilian ships were completely empty. The lead scout, a massive creature, known as the Harbinger, extended its sensory tendrils deeper into human territory. Its organic computers, grown from the neural tissue of a dozen conquered species, processed the data with confusion. Every human colony they approached was deserted. Not destroyed, not evacuated in panic, but simply empty, as if the inhabitants had vanished into thin air. On the bridge of the Harbinger, if it could be called a bridge, the Devourer commander communicated with its fleet through bioelectrical pulses. The creature had witnessed the fall of hundreds of civilizations over its 1,000-year lifespan. It had seen proud warrior races reduced to begging, advanced technological species torn apart by their own desperate attempts to fight back. But it had never seen anything like this. The silence was unnerving, even for a creature that fed on fear. Where were the humans? Why weren't they running or fighting? The Devourer scouts pushed deeper into human space, their confidence growing with each empty system they encountered. Perhaps this species was even weaker than expected. Maybe they had already fled to the galactic core, abandoning their territory. Entirely behind the scout fleet, something truly terrifying was approaching. The Apex Maw, the largest bioship in the Devourer armada, slowly glided through space like a moving continent. Its surface was covered in feeding tentacles that could drain the life from entire worlds, and its massive maw could literally swallow planets whole. This creature was ancient beyond measure. Having consumed thousands of worlds during its existence, the Apex Maw's consciousness was alien and vast. Filled with the memories of every species it had devoured, it could taste the fear of civilizations. From across the galaxy, but from human space, it sensed nothing. No terror, no desperation, just an odd sense of anticipation that it couldn't quite understand. As the Apex Maw approached the first major human colony world, its feeding apparatus began to unfold. Massive organic structures emerged from its body, designed to strip a planet of all biological matter within hours. The process was both efficient and horrifying, reducing entire ecosystems to nothing more than nutrients for the creature's continued growth. But something was different about this world. The Apex Maw's sensors detected the planet's cities, its infrastructure, even its agricultural systems. Everything was intact, but there were no life signs. It was as if the entire human population had simply vanished, leaving behind a perfectly preserved but empty world. The Devourer fleet gathered around the planet, their bioships pulsing with anticipation. They had never encountered anything like this before, but they were confident in their superiority. After all, they had conquered the galaxy once before, and they would do it again. The Devourer fleet had spread across 3 human star systems, their massive bioships moving with the lazy confidence of apex predators. They had done this so many times before that it had become routine. Find the prey, consume the prey, move on to the next system. The silence from human space only made them more certain of their inevitable victory. The Apex Maw had positioned itself in orbit around the first human colony world, its feeding tentacles already extending toward the planet's surface. Smaller Devourer vessels had taken positions throughout the system, some heading toward the asteroid mining facilities, others moving toward the outer planets where they expected to find hidden populations of humans cowering in underground bunkers. That's when space itself seemed to wake up. What had appeared to be empty void suddenly exploded into activity. Asteroids that had been drifting peacefully through space split open like mechanical flowers, revealing weapons platforms that immediately began targeting the nearest Devourer ships. The platforms weren't firing conventional energy weapons or projectiles. Instead, they launched something far more devastating: focused antimatter beams that tore through the bioship's organic armor like it was paper. From her hidden command ship, Captain Sorely watched the trap unfold with grim satisfaction. Her vessel was buried deep inside a hollowed-out asteroid, its hull coated with materials that made it invisible to Devourer sensors. She had been waiting in this position for weeks, along with hundreds of other human commanders positioned throughout the system. All units activate trap protocols, she transmitted across the encrypted human network. Let them know what happens when you hunt humanity's children. The response was immediate and overwhelming. What the Devourers had mistaken for empty space was actually the most sophisticated ambush in galactic history. Every piece of space debris, every abandoned satellite, every seemingly innocent cargo container had been converted into a weapon. The humans hadn't evacuated their colonies in fear. They had evacuated them to turn every single world into a death trap. The planet below the apex maw suddenly erupted in a series of massive explosions. The humans had rigged their own cities, with antimatter charges, turning their abandoned homes into planet-sized bombs. The detonations sent shockwaves through space that actually pushed the massive bioship away from the planet's surface. But that was just the beginning. The asteroid belt surrounding the system came alive with hidden weapons platforms. These weren't the simple defense systems that other species used. These were sophisticated killing machines designed specifically to target Devourer bioships. The weapons fired specialized rounds that could penetrate organic armor and then release toxins designed to poison the creatures from within. Smaller Devourer vessels found themselves caught in gravity traps that had been disguised as natural phenomena. What they had thought were harmless gas clouds were actually cloaking fields hiding massive gravity generators. The artificial gravity wells crushed several bioships instantly, while others found themselves trapped and unable to maneuver as human attack ships emerged from hiding. The most shocking moment came when the outer planets themselves began to move. What the Devourers had assumed were natural moons were actually artificial constructs, massive weapons platforms that had been disguised to look like celestial bodies. These planetary weapons opened fire with concentrated energy beams that could slice through even the largest bioships. For the first time in over 10,000 years, Devourer blood spilled in the vacuum of space. The creature's bioships leaked organic fluid that froze instantly in the cold void, creating clouds of crystallized alien blood that sparkled like deadly snow. The Devourer's confident advance had turned into a desperate fight for survival. As they realized they weren't the hunters anymore, they were the prey. The ambush had caught the Devourers completely off guard, but they were far from defeated. These creatures had survived for millions of years by adapting to any threat, and their bioships began to regenerate from the initial damage. The smaller vessels started to regroup, their organic hulls slowly healing from the antimatter burns, while the apex maw's massive form pulsed with rage. That's when the real human fleet arrived. From the direction of the Sol system, space began to shimmer and distort. What appeared to be empty void suddenly filled with massive shapes emerging from some kind of advanced cloaking technology. These weren't the exploration vessels or cargo ships that other species knew humanity for. These were warships, and they were unlike anything anyone had ever seen. The lead vessel was a monster of engineering that seemed to blend organic curves with mechanical precision. The UES Retribution stretched for nearly 10 kilometers, its hull covered in what looked like metallic scales that shifted and moved as if they were alive. Strange protrusions extended from its sides, pulsing with an eerie blue light that seemed familiar to the Devourers for all the wrong reasons. Behind the Retribution came dozens of similar vessels, each one a unique hybrid of human engineering and alien biotechnology. Some looked like mechanical predators with sleek, predatory lines, while others resembled massive insects with multiple weapon pods that moved independently. The entire fleet had an unsettling quality that made even the Devourers pause in their regeneration efforts. On the bridge of the Retribution, Admiral Ha-Jun Cho stood calmly watching the enemy fleet through the main view screen. His ship's bridge was a strange combination of human technology and organic interfaces that seemed to respond to his thoughts. As much as his commands, the neural connections embedded in his command chair allowed him to interface directly with the ship's hybrid systems, giving him unprecedented control over the vessel's capabilities. "Open a channel to all frequencies," he ordered, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent decades preparing for this moment. "Let them hear what we have to say." The transmission went out across all known communication frequencies, reaching not just the Devourer fleet, but every listening post and sensor station within 100 light-years. The message was intended for the entire galaxy to hear. Devourer's Admiral Cho's voice echoed through space, calm and measured despite the battle raging around him. "You made one mistake. One critical error that will cost you everything." Left survivors. The Devourer fleet hesitated, their bioship's regeneration slowing as they processed this unexpected communication. They had never encountered prey that spoke to them with such confidence, such certainty. "For the past century," the Admiral continued, "humanity has been listening to those survivors. We learned about your feeding patterns, your reproduction cycles, your weaknesses. We studied the wreckage of your victims' fleets and reverse-engineered your own biotechnology. While you slept in the void, we prepared for your return." The human fleet began to spread out in a complex formation, each ship moving with predatory grace. The Devourers could sense something wrong with these vessels, something that triggered ancient instincts they had thought long buried. "You see, Devourers, we didn't just build better weapons, built them using parts of you. Every ship in this fleet incorporates biotechnology salvaged from your ancient battlefields. We've turned your own evolution against you." The Admiral's voice grew colder, carrying the weight of humanity's determination. "You came here expecting to find another helpless species to devour. Instead, you've awakened something that should have stayed sleeping. And we're going to show you what happens when you threaten humanity's children." The human fleet opened fire, and the galaxy would never be the same. The Apex Maw's massive form pulsed with a deep, resonant call that traveled through subspace faster than light itself. It was a sound that had not been heard in the galaxy for 10,000 years, a hunting cry that had once struck terror into the hearts of countless civilizations. Across the dark void, hundreds of bioships that had been dormant in the empty spaces between stars began to stir. The response was swift and terrifying. From every direction, massive organic vessels emerged from hyperspace, their living hulls still dripping with the strange fluids of their long sleep. These weren't just the scout ships that had initially probed human space. These were the true Devourer war forms, creatures that had been grown specifically for conquest and destruction. Some of the arriving bioships were even larger than the Apex Maw, their surfaces covered in feeding tentacles that could drain entire space stations in minutes. Others were sleeker, more predatory, designed for speed and overwhelming firepower. The smallest were still the size of human cruisers, but they moved in swarms like metallic locusts, their numbers darkening the space around human colonies. The human fleet, impressive as it was, suddenly found itself outnumbered 10-1. The Devourers had learned from their initial surprise and were no longer underestimating their prey. The bioships began to spread out in complex formations, using tactics that had been refined over millions of years of conquest. That's when the real horror began. The Devourers unleashed weapons that defied human understanding of physics. Massive bioships opened what looked like mouths along their hulls, releasing clouds of organic matter that moved through space like living storms. These weren't simple projectiles or energy beams. They were biological weapons, viruses designed to consume metal and organic matter alike, turning enemy ships into food for the Devourer fleet. The first human vessel to be caught in one of these bioclouds, a destroyer called the New Soul, began to dissolve from the outside in. Its hull plating started to bubble and melt as the aggressive organisms ate through the ship's armor. Emergency broadcasts from the crew described their horror as the ship's life support systems began to fail. Not from damage, but from being literally consumed by microscopic predators. But the Devourers weren't finished. The larger bioships began to emit psychic attacks that had once driven entire civilizations to madness. Waves of mental energy washed over the human fleet, carrying with them the accumulated fear and despair of every species the Devourers had consumed over the millennia. The psychic assault was designed to overwhelm enemy crews, turning them into helpless victims who would simply surrender to their fate. On the bridge of the UES Retribution, Lieutenant Commander Yujin Nam felt the psychic wave hit her like a physical blow. For a moment, her mind was filled with the screams of billions of beings who had died in the Devourer's feeding frenzies. She could feel their terror, their hopelessness, their final moments of agony, as they were consumed by creatures they couldn't comprehend. But then her training kicked in. Like every member of the human fleet, Eugen had spent years preparing for this exact moment. She activated the neural dampeners built into her command station, devices that had been designed specifically to counter Devourer psychic attacks. Around her, the bridge crew did the same, their faces showing strain, but not the mindless terror that had consumed other species. All ships implement countermeasure protocols, she transmitted across the fleet. Remember your training. Remember why we're here. The human response was immediate and coordinated. Every ship in the fleet activated its biowarfare countermeasures, releasing specialized nanites that could neutralize the Devourer bioweapons. Energy fields designed to disrupt psychic attacks flickered to life around each vessel. The humans had studied every weapon in the Devourer arsenal and prepared specific defenses for each one. The battle had become exactly what Admiral Cho had predicted, a test of preparation versus adaptation. But humanity had been preparing for this fight for 3 generations. The battle had been raging for hours, both sides taking heavy casualties. The space around the human colony was filled with the wreckage of destroyed ships and the crystallized blood of wounded bio-creatures. It's just when it seemed like the Devourer's superior numbers might overwhelm the human defenses. Admiral Ha-Jin Cho revealed humanity's most closely guarded secret. All units implement Phase 7 protocols, he transmitted. Across the fleet, it's time to show them what we've really been working on. 60 years ago, a human deep space exploration vessel had discovered something that changed everything. Hidden in the ruins of an ancient battlefield, it found a damaged Devourer bioship that had been left behind after one of their feeding frenzies. The creature was still alive, but barely, its organic system slowly failing after millennia of isolation. Instead of destroying it or fleeing in terror, like most species would have done, the humans had done something unprecedented. They had captured it. For 6 decades, humanity's best scientists had studied the creature in secret facilities buried deep beneath the Earth's surface. They had learned its biological structure, mapped its neural pathways, and most importantly, discovered how the Devourers communicated with each other. The bioships weren't just individual creatures. They were part of a vast biological network, connected through bioelectrical signals that allowed them to coordinate their attacks. Major Du Haiyan Kong had been preparing for this moment his entire adult life. His team of infiltrators wore biomimetic suits that had been grown from samples of the captured Devourer, allowing them to pass as part of the creature's own biological systems. They had been inserted into the enemy fleet hours before the battle began, hiding within the bioships like viruses waiting to activate. Strike teams are in position, Major Kong reported from somewhere deep inside a massive Devourer vessel. Beginning internal assault now, the infiltrators weren't carrying conventional weapons. Instead, they had been equipped with biological warfare agents specifically designed to target Devourer physiology. These weren't just toxins or explosives. They were engineered viruses that could rewrite the creature's genetic code, turning their own biological systems against them. The first sign of the counterattack came when several of the smaller Devourer vessels suddenly began to convulse. Their organic hulls started to change color, shifting from their natural dark purple to a sickly yellow-green. The bioships' movements became erratic as their nervous systems were overwhelmed by the human-engineered viruses. But the real target was the Apex Maw. The UES Retribution had been designed for one specific purpose: to kill the largest and most dangerous Devourer bioships. Its weapons weren't just meant to destroy the creature, but to cause it maximum pain and suffering. The humans had learned from their studies that the Devourers were capable of feeling fear and agony, emotions they had never shown to their own victims. Target the Apex Maw's neural clusters, Admiral Cho ordered. Let it feel what every world it consumed felt in their final moments. The Retribution opened fire with weapons that had been reverse-engineered from Devourer biotechnology. The energy beams weren't just destructive. They were designed to overstimulate the creature's nervous system, causing waves of agony to ripple through its massive form. The apex maw's bioelectric screams echoed through space as it experienced something it had never felt before: true helplessness. Meanwhile, Major Kong's infiltration teams had reached the critical systems of multiple bioships. They began planting biological bombs that would consume the creatures from within, turning their own feeding mechanisms against them. The Devourers had spent millennia perfecting the art of consumption, but they had never expected to become the consumed. The tide of battle was turning, and for the first time in galactic history, the Devourers were learning what it meant to be prey. The apex maw writhed in agony as the human weapons tore through its massive form. Its bioelectric screams had grown so intense that they were disrupting communication systems across the entire battle zone. But Admiral Ha-Jin Cho wasn't satisfied with simply killing the creature from the outside. This battle was personal, and he intended to make sure the apex maw understood exactly what it meant to be hunted. "Prepare the boarding pods," he ordered, his voice carrying the cold determination of someone who had spent decades planning for this moment. "We're going inside." The boarding pods launched from the UES Retribution weren't conventional assault shuttles. They were biological constructs, grown from the same devourer tissue that had been studied for 60 years. To the apex maw's immune system, they would appear to be part of its own body, allowing the human strike teams to penetrate deep into the creature's interior. As the pods burrowed through the apex maw's outer hull, Admiral Cho and his assault team found themselves in a nightmare landscape of living corridors. The walls pulsed with the creature's heartbeat, and the floor beneath their feet was warm and slightly yielding, like walking on living skin. Bioluminescent veins running along the ceiling provided an eerie blue-green light that made everything look like an underwater cave. The apex maw's immune system responded immediately to the intruders. Antibody creatures the size of attack dogs began swarming toward the human teams, their acidic saliva capable of dissolving metal and flesh alike. But the humans had prepared for this too. Their biomedic suits released pheromones that confused the creature's defenses, while their weapons fired rounds specifically designed to neutralize organic threats. "Stay together and keep moving," Admiral Cho commanded, as his team fought their way deeper into the creature. The neural core is 3 kilometers ahead. The journey through the apex maw's body was like traveling through a living hell. They passed through chambers filled with the partially digested remains of entire space stations, their twisted metal forms still recognizable even after being processed by the creature's digestive systems. In other areas, they found storage pods containing the preserved genetic material of hundreds of extinct species, trophies from the Devourer's millennia of conquest. But the most disturbing discovery was the consciousness chambers. These were organic pods that contained the still-living minds of beings the apex maw had consumed, kept alive so the creature could feed on their terror and despair for eternity. The pods held scientists, warriors, even children from dozens of different species, all trapped in an endless nightmare of being slowly digested while remaining conscious. "Sir, we can't leave them like this," one of his officers said, staring in horror at the thousands of pods lining the chamber walls. "Plant the charges," Admiral Cho replied grimly. "Death is a mercy we can give them." As the human teams placed antimatter charges throughout the creature's body, the apex maw's consciousness began to realize what was happening. For the first time in its million-year existence, it felt genuine fear. Through bioelectric impulses, it began to communicate with the intruders, its voice echoing through the organic corridors. "Stop." The creature's voice was like the sound of a dying star, filled with pain and desperation. "I can give you power beyond imagination, knowledge of the galaxy's secrets, the location of treasures from 1,000 worlds." Admiral Cho paused at the entrance to the neural core, a massive chamber containing a brain the size of a city building. The brain pulsed with the memories of every world the creature had consumed, every species it had driven to extinction. "You're asking for mercy?" the Admiral said, his voice carrying across the chamber. "The same mercy you showed to the billions of beings you've devoured over the millennia." The same mercy you gave to the children whose minds you've kept alive in your torture chambers. The apex maw's consciousness recoiled as it felt the final charges being planted around its neural core. Please, it begged. I can change. Can help you rule the galaxy. Admiral Cho's response was simple and final. You wanted to devour us. Instead, you've awakened something that should have stayed sleeping. Humanity doesn't forgive, and we don't forget. The antimatter charges detonated simultaneously, and the apex maw's death screams echoed across subspace as the continent sized creature tore itself apart. The death of the apex maw sent shockwaves through the remaining Devourer fleet. That went far beyond the physical destruction of their flagship. The creature's final bioelectric screams had carried something that terrified the other bioships even more than the human weapons. The knowledge that they could be killed, that they were not the unstoppable force they had believed themselves to be for millions of years. Within hours of the apex maw's destruction, the remaining Devourer vessels began to retreat toward the galactic rim. These creatures, who had never known defeat, were experiencing something completely alien to their nature, fear. Their bioships moved erratically. It's no longer the confident predators that had terrorized the galaxy, but wounded animals seeking the safety of the deep void. But Admiral Ha-Jen Cho had no intention of letting them escape. The human fleet pursued the retreating Devourers with relentless determination, their hybrid ships proving faster and more maneuverable than the bio-vessels. This wasn't just about winning a battle anymore. This was about sending a message to the entire galaxy that humanity would not tolerate threats to innocent life. The most devastating weapon in humanity's arsenal wasn't their ships or their weapons. It was what they had learned from 60 years of studying the captured Devourer. The humans had cracked the bioship's communication network, the biological internet that connected every Devourer in the galaxy. They had created a virus, not just any virus, but one specifically designed to target the Devourer's core programming. Release the Hunter Protocol, Admiral Cho ordered from the bridge of the UES Retribution. Let them know that nowhere in the galaxy is safe from humanity's justice. The virus spread through the Devourer network faster than their bioships could flee. It was elegant in its simplicity and terrifying in its effectiveness. The virus didn't just kill the creatures. It reprogrammed them, turning their own biological systems against them. Devourer bioships across the galaxy began to shut down, their feeding mechanisms reversing to consume their own organic matter. But the virus did something even more devastating. It made the bioships broadcast their location to human forces, turning every Devourer in the galaxy into a beacon that would guide human hunter-killer teams directly to them. The predators had become the prey. There was nowhere in the galaxy they could hide. Back on the galactic capital, the emergency council session was unlike anything in recorded history. Representatives from hundreds of worlds sat in stunned silence as Director Mina Kim addressed the assembly. The same woman who had asked for the Devourer's coordinates just days ago now stood before them as the representative of the galaxy's newest superpower. The Devourer threat has been neutralized, she announced, her voice carrying across the chamber with quiet authority. But let me be clear about what this means for the future of our galaxy. The holographic display behind her showed the current status of the Devourer fleet. Red markers that had once represented unstoppable bioships were now flashing with warning signals as they were systematically hunted down by human forces. The creatures that had once been the galaxy's greatest nightmare were being eliminated, one by one. Humanity has no interest in conquest or domination, Director Kim continued. But we will not tolerate threats to innocent life. Any species that preys on the defenseless, that consumes civilizations for their own gain, will find themselves facing the same fate as the Devourers. The message was clear and unmistakable. Humanity had not just defeated the Devourers. They had appointed themselves as the galaxy's protectors, and they had the power to enforce that role. Species that had spent millennia terrorizing their neighbors suddenly found themselves reconsidering their actions. In the months that followed, the galaxy began to change. Trade routes that had been closed for centuries reopened as the threat of Devourer attacks vanished. Smaller species that had lived in fear for generations began to explore and expand their territories. The galaxy was entering a new age of peace and prosperity, protected by a species that had proven they would show no mercy to those who threatened the innocent. The age of the Devourers was over. The age of human guardianship had begun.